So Natalie, Lindsay, and Matthew are not here. Matthew said he's going to be gone today. I don't know about Lindsay and Natalie, but everyone else is. You have a couple of minutes before class starts yet, so if you want to get the information of your group members so that you have contact with them or some form of contact or a way to reach them, you can. Your groups are on the screen. Melanie and Anissa are online and they're in a group together, so that's convenient. Like I said, Matthew's absent today. Natalie's gone. Well, I mean, she's not here. I don't know if she's going to come. Lindsay's the blonde girl that usually sits there. Yeah. She's usually a little late. So Anissa, Melanie, I don't know if you guys want to talk to each other.
Okay. Usually you can look up their email as far as Canvas, right?
Yeah.
Well, I think text message would be faster because
Probably, huh?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I can just give you my number here if you want.
Okay.
Put it on your phone.
Yeah, that's fine. And then I'll just text you letting you know that it's me.
Okay, that's fine.
And Natalie just joined online for whoever has Natalie in their group, Susan and Sam. There's also a chat option on Canvas. If you guys are both online at the same time and on Canvas at the same time, you can chat through there. Yeah. Like I said, Natalie just joined online. So if you guys want to talk to her, you can. Yeah.
Hi, Natalie.
Hi.
How are you doing?
I'm sorry?
How are you doing?
You're so
I
soft.
can't really hear you.
Oh, sorry. Okay, never mind. Do you want us to give you our number, or shall we take your number down and then message you?
Yeah, you can do that.
Do you have WhatsApp?
No.
That's all right. Then we'll just do normal messages, right? I suppose.
Yeah, you want my number?
Sure.
432
One sec. 432.
853
Right. Yeah.
8526.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you.
No problem. And then if you just want to text me your number so I can know it's y'all.
Sure.
Maybe we should do like a group.
You can do that on text. Right?
Yeah.
Or-
And there's Lindsay.
Your website messages.
Yeah.
Message. To. You got my number.
It's staring at Lindsay. I'm like, what's different about her? Oh, I can see your face. What's up? Sorry.
Yeah, what's this?
Like, you look so different today. Really?
bathroom.
Yeah, that should come through.
Okay. So today we are doing Christian and Byzantine art, although those two are pretty much the same thing. They go hand in hand. So basically we're going to be talking about the medieval era today, and we're also going to begin going over the Renaissance as well. We won't finish the Renaissance, but we'll get to a good stopping point. And Monday we'll finish the Renaissance really fast, and it should only take about a third of the class period, and then you'll have the rest of it to work on just your project. I would recommend that you go ahead and look through the textbook this weekend and maybe come up with a consensus on what 2 objects you want to do. And then on Monday, come in with the idea of starting to research those things. That would be my recommendation. Do you have to follow my recommendation? No. But yeah, that would just be my recommendation to be on track.
So with your 2 objects,
2 objects, yeah.
like each or like for the whole?
No, for the whole thing.
Okay.
So all 3 of you have to agree on 2 things.
And then you set up the 25 so we can like split it.
Mm-hmm. That's usually what people decide to do. Same with the presenting. Usually people decide to split up that too. But it's whatever you guys decide. I didn't get super strict on the presenting part because that's not what I'm grading. I'm grading the actual presentation itself. So yeah.
And then how are we putting it on the canvas?
You have to turn it in Wednesday at midnight on Canvas so that it's easy access for Thursday for the presentation. I've done it different ways before, and what ends up happening is someone comes last minute and the presentation isn't even saved on their drive that they brought. That and our IT guys are getting really mad about thumb drives because they always have viruses on them. So you're going to submit it online through Canvas. And then we'll just pull it up on Thursday and you guys can talk about it. But yeah, today we're going to finish chapter 16 and start chapter 17. So a little background information, which I mean, I feel like it's probably common sense, but I grew up in a very historian-oriented household. Rome was polytheistic. But in 313, it adopted Christianity and legalized Christianity. That was Emperor Constantine's doing. Prior to that, it was illegal to be a Christian in the Roman Empire. You would be fined, put in jail, crucified, hunted down, a lot of bad stuff. But in 313, finally, Christianity was okay and accepted. Mostly because Emperor Constantine was on his deathbed and freaking out that he was going to die and go to hell. So he adopted Christianity, and then all of a sudden he got better. And he said, it must have been a miracle from God. So then he made the entire Roman army convert to Christianity, put crosses on all of their armor. They kept winning battles. So he thought that was also thanks to God, and built a bunch of churches. Yep, Constantine. He disowned his mother because she refused to convert to Christianity. She remained a pagan her entire life. But yeah, with the change in religion came a major change in the art style and artistic choices. We no longer see depictions of gods and goddesses or nudity because that is sinful. And instead, we see a lot of imagery of Christian figures and icons. We also get rid of a lot of the storytelling aspect of art that the Greeks and the Romans have and go for more just representational images of saints and apostles. And for some reason, during this era, we see a lot less paintings and sculptures made. Instead, there is a shift to mosaics, tapestries, illustration, and some frescoes, but those frescoes will also be lost as we go throughout time. Things get lost. So, because Christianity was originally illegal in Rome, the Christians that did exist in Rome had to worship secretly in catacombs. Who knows what a catacomb is?
It's the burial underground.
Yeah, it's an underground burial chamber. So these guys would worship underground with dead people so that they wouldn't get thrown in jail or fined or crucified. Because those were their places of worship, they did decorate them with frescoes such as the one seen here. Up here is Christ with two lambs being depicted as the shepherd. Over here are the apostles. So we do have some illustrations and frescoes still in existence during early Christian art. But keep in mind, this is when Christianity was still illegal and polytheism was fragrant in Rome. Eventually, as Christianity spreads and rises to power and popularity, even frescoes are going to disappear. A little bit of a timeline for you for Rome. The Edict of Milan that legalizes Christianity was released in 313. In 330, Emperor Constantine, that guy that was kind of odd, moved the capital of Rome from Rome to Byzantium. Changed the name of Byzantium to Constantinople. Today, that location is present-day Istanbul, but that is the reason why a good chunk of art from this time period is called Byzantine art, because of the city of Byzantium where most of it was produced. And then, of course, not too long after that, 65 years later, the Roman Empire gets really, really large. It stretches into parts of Russia, Asia, North Africa, and all the way into England. And because they get so big, they have to divide into two. I don't know why I can't fix that. Natalie got kicked out. But I cannot fix that right now. I'm teaching this class. Okay. Yeah.
Sorry, me and Melanie can't see it.
Oh, I just realized that I was still sharing the other screen. Sorry. Thank you. I was worried about Natalie because Natalie got kicked out and is saying she can't get back on. But I'm not an IT person, so. Yeah. But that I can fix. So everything that you missed is just like a little historical background. It's not super important anyway, so you'll be fine. The thing that's most important for this section is the art. A little while after, a little less than 100 years after, Rome ends up splitting into an Eastern and Western empire. By the way, each empire has their own ruler. The western half, which is the main part of the Roman Empire, ends up being taken over by nomadic Germanic barbarian tribes. The Eastern Empire will flourish for a really long period of time after, but eventually it will be conquered by Muslims. So, yeah, and Mongols. Muslims and Mongols, which Mongols are another barbaric nomadic tribe. So, yeah. Each half of the empire, the Western and Eastern, are going to adopt their own version of Christianity. The Western Hemisphere calls their version of Christianity Roman Catholicism. Very different from Roman Catholic today, though. Do not be mistaken as thinking they're the same. They are not. They are very, 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 very different. And the Eastern Empire adopts Eastern Orthodox Christianity, also very different from anything you might think of as Christianity today. This is a lovely bits of colossal statue that we have of the wonderful and amazing Emperor Constantine. This statue used to be ginormous, which you can kind of tell since she's standing next to his kneecap, and it used to be his entire body. Here we have his hand, part of the crook of his arm, and his head. Emperor Constantine, once again, the one that legalized Christianity. After him is going to be Emperor Justinian. Justinian's really going to solidify the adoption of Christianity, specifically in depictions artistically. So we'll see a lot less devotion towards realism and more devotion towards depicting saints and apostles. Which you can kind of see in Constantine's face, the slight deviation from realism, specifically with his eyes. They're a bit cartoonish. Other things that pop up during the Byzantine era, I already mentioned a lot of churches. The early church would have been wooden, and it would have been in a basilica format. Basilicas are squares. They used to be meeting houses in Rome, like assembly meeting halls in Rome, but then after Christian was adopted and everyone converted, they converted the assembly halls into churches. Once again, these would have been wooden. There would have been aisle for you to walk down and seating on each side of the aisle. At the front would have been the nave. That's where the priest preached from. Later on, they are going to add the transept area to create more of a crucifix form. In the transepts would have been reliquary items. Relic items are like a piece of the cross, Mary's cloak, a nail from the cross, some sort of supposedly piece that was owned by some famous religious figure. People would go on big trips to see those relic items, so they created side hallways so that you could go in and see the relic items without disturbing the actual service later. The church at San Vitale in Ravenna, however, is not a traditional rectangular basilica worship hall. It is octagonal. That is because it is a private church. It is not meant for the masses to attend. It is a family-owned chapel, owned by the Emperor Justinian and Theodora. Justinian had a lot of private chapels, that's just one. He's also the one that constructed Hagia Sophia. If you remember back to that, that one was not a private chapel, that was meant for the masses. It was on a basilica format, but it has the large dome and two semi-domes on each side. But yeah. And inside of the church at San Vitale, it is covered from ceiling to floor in mosaics. A lot of the mosaic tiles are actually covered in gold leaf. So very, very fancy, extravagant, exquisite. But it does show that shift from realism into a more flat two-dimensional depiction of images. And of course, represented in some of those images are Justinian and his wife Theodora. This is the exterior of San Vitale. So you can see it is obviously not a basilica format. These are flying buttresses. That is because there are several windows included in the church. This is way before the Gothic era, by the way. And some of the mosaics. So here we see Theodora, the Empress of the Western Roman Empire, and her attendants. She is depicted with a halo, even though she's alive. Sometimes you usually think if you have a halo, you must be dead and in heaven. But she was alive when this was made, but she is shown as a religious icon still, even though she's not dead. She and her husband for the mosaics in this church have merged politics and religion, making it seem as if God selected them to rule and they've been given God's blessing, hearkening back to early Egyptian and Roman and Greek styles and art of head figures of politics saying that they were chosen by the gods and goddesses. Here is her husband, Justinian, with all of his attendants as well. He also has a halo. The interesting thing about all of the mosaics is there is no ground for these guys to stand on, like the ground level is just missing. The Greeks and Romans did know how to show a ground level, but for some reason it's gone here because it's been covered by the cloaks. Because that ground level is missing, it looks like they're floating, especially with the positioning of the feet. Also, the cloaks and fabric are extraordinarily stiff in appearance. That is something that was lost during this time period as well. They used to be able to show flowing fabrics in things, even mosaics. There's a mosaic of Alexander the Great, which shows extraordinary realism, which if you once again take the survey course, you will get to see. And of course, Alexander the Great definitely predates all of this. It's from the early Roman Empire. So realism has been lost during the Byzantine era. We still have some realism in the face, but it's also a bit cartoonish and flat. And the cartoonish effect will definitely increase as time goes on. Here's another mosaic from San Vitale. This shows Christ as Panto-creator, or Christ as the creator of everything. That was a popular theme in the Byzantine era. That takes us to what was happening in the Eastern era. So in the Western era, we have mosaics, a lot of images of religious figures and religious icons. In the Eastern Orthodox half of the empire, though, a man named Leo III was in charge. He was the Pope for that region. And in 726, Leo III orders all Christian imagery to be destroyed. He thinks that it is a form of idolatry to have such a thing. So, for example, let's say we had a picture of Mary on the wall and someone was praying while looking at the picture. A normal human would probably think, well, he's still praying to Mary or she's still praying to Mary. Leo felt like you were praying to the painting, therefore committing idolatry. You are not praying to the saint or apostle or a religious figure. You are praying to the statue or the painting itself, the object, which is a sin in the Bible. So he had everything destroyed. Because of that, we don't have too much imagery from the Eastern Orthodox Empire. There are a few things. Obviously, this does lead to a major chasm between the East and the West in Rome. The Eastern Empire is now officially titled with Eastern Orthodox Christianity, and the Western Empire is titled with Roman Catholicism. Roman Catholics obviously have a lot of imagery. That is totally okay, even today, back then as well, which is why we have things like this from the Western Hemisphere of the Roman Empire. In the East, they don't have things like that. There are a few examples, but they're quite rare. One example that does exist is this one. This is, or well, I say it was in the Hagia Sophia. This also is Christ as Panto-creator. But this image was removed from the Hagia Sophia. Not during the Byzantine era, though. It was removed when the Muslims conquered Byzantine. In Muslim faith, it's also considered idolatry to have imagery of religious figures, which is why instead they do a lot of calligraphy and geometric patterns instead. So this no longer exists because, yeah, it was taken down. And that was all gold leaf. But you can see also in the Eastern Empire, they obviously have a lot of flatness going on, a lot of outlines and bold, black. That's not what the Romans and the Greeks did. That's what happened during the Byzantine era. And of course, another example of Byzantine art is Andrei Rublev's Old Testament Trinity. We'll look at that one in a second. Eastern Orthodox style, since imagery of Christian and biblical figures was considered idolatry, it was closely supervised by the Eastern Orthodox Church. Oftentimes, artists that did make things in that time would use a lot of symbols and mysticism to try to illustrate their point without getting in trouble by the church. Andrei Rublev, however, well, I mean, there is symbolism in here. Without actually knowing what this is about, you probably wouldn't understand other than you'd see angels. Obviously, there are 3 angels here, and we know that because of the wings and the halos. There's a lot of symbolism used. The angels' faces have a lot of detail and shading to help make them look a little bit more realistic. Their bodies are extremely flat and S-shaped curvilinear, making them appear a bit sensual. S-shapes tend to be sensual. The table and chairs they're sitting at, extremely flat. And they're both inside and outside at the same time. So the foreground image is an interior setting and the background shows an exterior setting. That is to try to help illustrate the point. And this particular point is the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. Does anyone know that story? Sodom and Gomorrah? Yes, no, what happened? Anyone that knows it? Welcome to Religion 101. No. So in the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, which is an Old Testament story, these 2 cities of Sodom and Gomorrah are considered beyond saving by God. So God decides that instead of trying to help them and fix them, by the way, that's where we get the word sodomy too, is from Sodom, the city. Anyways, but instead of trying to fix them, he's just going to rain down fire and brimstone on the 2 cities and destroy them and kill everyone and start over again. The angels in heaven protest and say, surely there's someone worth saving in that city. And God says, if you can find 100 people, then I'll spare the city. And he sends 3 angels, these guys, down to earth to try and find the quota of people to spare the city. The angels only find 1 family of, I think it was like 4 or 5 people worth saving in those 2 cities. God decides to spare that 1 family and gives them a chance to flee before he destroys Sodom and Gomorrah, which he does. I can't remember the husband's name. I think it was Isaac, but I'm not sure. But anyways, Isaac's wife ends up turning around, and she was told not to turn around and watch, but it was her home being destroyed and she was very sad. So she turned around and then she turned to a pillar of salt. Anyways, and then the story goes on and Isaac ends up sleeping with his 2 daughters, and it's really gross. But yeah, that's a little bit of Old Testament facts for you there. But this part illustrates the angels going into Sodom and Gomorrah, trying to find the people that they were supposed to find to save the cities. And they're meeting around the table to discuss what happened, which was negative. Takes us into the Middle Ages in Europe, although we've technically been there for a while. The Middle Ages mark the end of the Roman Empire, the fall of it to those Germanic tribes, all the way until the Renaissance period. So the Germanic tribes take over Rome around 400 BCE, or not BCE, AD. We're in AD now, sorry. They take over Rome in 400 AD. The Renaissance doesn't begin until the end of 1200 AD. So we're talking about a long period of time that is known as the Middle Ages, Medieval Ages, or Dark Ages. There's a reason why they're called the Dark Ages, because we forget everything that the Greeks and Romans have ever taught us. And it's very sad. But it makes sense because these nomadic tribes that take over the Western Roman Empire, they don't speak the original language, and they don't have any writing system. Therefore, they had no way to communicate or convey those Greek and Roman ideas that once existed. Eventually, Christians will set about to convert all of these barbarians, but it's going to take a lot of time. When the Christians do convert these barbarians and pagans, they eventually learn how to read and write. Yay. These barbarians were so feared and so disliked that major walls were built to keep them out. Hadrian's Wall was built in Britain to keep them out. It still exists, there's pieces of it. And another barbaric nomadic tribe that existed in the east was trying to invade China, the Mongolians or Mongols. And the Great Wall of China was built to keep them out. So we have a bunch of individual tribes of people that aren't really connected at all. The only connection that they all have is that they have no writing system. And they don't speak Greek or Italian. Therefore, they are barbarians. Most of what we know about these nomadic tribes in Northern Europe is through what we find in burial sites. One nomadic tribe that you might be a little bit more familiar with is the Vikings. Yay! Yes, they were considered barbarians. They had no writing system, and the Greeks thought when the Vikings spoke that all they were saying was bar, 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 bar. That's why they called barbarians. But the Vikings did have a very interesting system for dealing with their dead, specifically high-ranking heroic figures in their society. They would put the dead body on a ship, fill the ship with a bunch of precious metals and items, and set the ship on fire. This is the Sutton Hoo ship. It did not burn. So everything that was stuck inside of it, we still have today, which is exciting for people like me. Some of the things found in this Viking Sutton Hoo ship were this purse cover, which kind of illustrates the kind of art that came out of a lot of these nomadic tribes. We don't have paintings, sculptures, anything like that, but we do have a lot of craft work and craftsmanship, specifically metalworking, which is what is here. So here we have a gold purse. The gold has been melted down and beaten and inlaid with semi-precious stones. And of course, you can see there are animal motifs, obviously very figurative looking animal motifs, as well as this, which will eventually become known as the Celtic knots, which are just entwining vines. Another piece found in the Sutton Hoo ship is this belt clasp, once again showing off the metal work. Coins, and this other belt buckle, which I think is really impressive. It is brass. Very skilled craftsmen, despite the fact that they couldn't read or write. So as I said, these medieval or dark ages or middle ages are dominated by these nomadic tribes. Eventually the Christians will convert them. Most of these nomadic tribes were pagan and believed in multiple gods. If you know about the Vikings, you know they had a ton of gods and goddesses that they worshipped. Eventually the Christians go and convert all of them. When they do that, they teach them how to read and write. Which leads to a development in their nomadic styles. They still have a lot of animal motifs and natural curvilinear forms, but they add some new things. Instead of just metal smithing and craftswork, they start illustrating books and making tapestries. One book that is an illuminated text. That's what it means to illustrate a book in this time period, is the Book of Kells. The Book of Kells is probably the most famous illustrated book from this time period. It is from Ireland. It's still located in Ireland. Has anyone seen it?
I've seen like pictures of it.
Yeah. I had a cousin go to Ireland once for band. It was very sad. I was jealous, not sad. Her band ended up playing in the St. Patrick's Day parade in Ireland, which sounds awesome. That's like where you want to be for St. Patrick's Day, Ireland. And they got to go to the library this book is housed in. The book illustrates basically the simple Greek alphabet system and some words to help learn them. The page that we're going to start off looking at is the page that illustrates the Greek letters of X and P, but it's not just a page that has like an X and a P. There's a whole lot of filigree added to it. And this is X and P. So up here you have the X. And down below is the P. At the end of the P is a human head. Why? We don't know. But there is a human head on it. A lot of the pages of the Book of Kells have random inserted little things that if you look really close, you can find. There's another page that has a cat chasing a mouse on it, which is really cute to look at. The pages are turned every single day in the library it's housed in today, so you don't see the same one over and over again. But you can see some of the translation of the early metalsmithing motifs added over here, so we still have some animalistic figures added, as well as a lot of natural curvy objects and patterns. Here's another page from that manuscript. This one is very much influenced by Christianity versus nomadic. But this helps to show you what happens to the art during the Dark Ages or the Middle Ages. It becomes extraordinarily flat and cartoon-like. Like even more so than what it was during the Byzantine era, obviously. These pages would have been hand painted and hand drawn. They were not printed. The printing press did not exist then. That takes us into what's happening in architecture during the Dark Ages. First trend in architecture that pops up is the Romanesque style. During the Romanesque era of architecture, they switched from having wooden churches or basilicas to having concrete and stone churches. They also add in a lot of Roman architectural motifs like arches and columns. It's during the Romanesque era of architecture that we also see a reintroduction into sculptures, particularly large sculptures of human figures. A lot of those large sculptures would have been placed above doorways and beside doorways on these Romanesque churches. And this is the exterior of just one Romanesque church. So once again, instead of a wooden structure, we have a stone structure. And of course, on the outside, you can see the reintroduction of stone carvings. These are high relief carvings. They are still attached to the exterior of the building. All the way from the Byzantine era until the reintroduction of the Romanesque period, there are no large statues being carved. So you're talking about hundreds of years worth of time in which no one produced a large statue, which is kind of sad. But then finally, during the Romanesque, we have large statues. This is the interior of that same church, just showing off the arches and columns. Once again, Romanesque is Roman-like, so they're using Roman architectural features. And here is a close-up of a relief above the entryway of that church. Once again, relief sculptures, carvings like this did not exist after the fall of Rome until the Romanesque era. And this also shows price. Christ as Panto-Creator. But you will notice looking at this, this is not to any extent detailed in the way that the Romans created their reliefs or the Greeks created their reliefs. This Christ has no nose. And it's not because it broke off. He just hasn't got a nose. He has two bug eyes and no nose. Does have a beard. All of these guys, they aren't detailed to the extent of what the Romans and the Greeks were capable of doing. Another trend in architecture that follows the Romanesque era of architecture is Gothic. Gothic is like the Romanesque style, just extra. Instead of round arches, we have pointed arches. We introduce stained glass windows, which leads to the creation of, well, not the creation, but the usage of flying buttresses, which hadn't been used since the Byzantine era, with churches like San Vitale. In the Gothic era of architecture lasts for a very long time. It goes into the Renaissance period of art. Of course, we've looked at Gothic architecture before. Your pointed arches, your stained glass windows, the flying buttresses. Here's the other view that shows you early Gothic versus late Gothic architecture, just to see how that advances throughout time. And that takes us into Renaissance, finally. The Renaissance marks the end of the Dark Ages. Yay. Renaissance literally translates to rebirth, specifically a rebirth of Greek and Roman ideas. So we're going to see a reintroduction of Greek art, Roman art, their architecture, and their ways of thinking. The Baroque period follows the Renaissance period. It's very similar to the Greek Hellenistic period. So if you remember yesterday when we were going over Greek art, there's the classical period followed by the Hellenistic period. The Hellenistic period is very exaggerated and elaborate. That's exactly how the Baroque period is as well. The Renaissance period is very similar to Greek classical period. So like it's just history repeating itself. Rococo period only happens in France. It's happening the same time as the Baroque period. It is very ornate, over the top, and it's all about showing off wealth. And the motifs all have to do with romance. We will get to Baroque and Rococo tomorrow. We won't do it today. Humanism is a way of thinking which is all about critically thinking and creating a sense of individuality in a person. This really is the root of the Renaissance and how the Renaissance sparks. So the printing press makes its way to Europe. And for the first time, people are able to obtain texts in their own native language instead of Greek or Latin, which were both dead languages at this point in history. Nobody spoke it except for priests. So people that were interested in reading these texts read them, and they realized that they didn't quite agree with the way life had been. They think that life could be more, there's more to it, and I can use my ideas to better my life, i.e. critical thinking. One text that was very popularly printed during the early Renaissance period is the Bible. The Bible was originally only available in Latin. Like I said, nobody spoke Latin except for priests. Funny enough, all of the church services in the Dark Ages and early Renaissance were also in Latin. Nobody spoke Latin. You're going to a church service. You don't even know what the dude's saying. By the way, if you didn't go to church service, you would be fined or put in jail. But you were required to go. Listen to someone talk in a language that you didn't understand. Makes a lot of sense, right? So because of things like that happening, which are just crazy, people start reading the Bible in English and saying, wow, I don't quite agree with the way the church is right now. I'm going to make my own religion, which is how things like Baptists, Calvinists, Pilgrims, Puritans, and Jehovah's Witnesses pop up. People reading the Bible in their own language and deciding that they don't want to be Catholic, they want to be something different. Once again, the Catholic Church at that point in time is a lot different from today. The Catholic Church at that point in time believed in a heaven, hell, and purgatory. You still kind of do today, but it's a little bit different. Back then, in order to get out of purgatory, you had to receive an abundant amount of prayers from people after you died to have your soul rise into heaven. In order to get those prayers, you had to pay people to pray for you or donate large sums of money to the church, and then the church would pray for your soul to rise from purgatory into heaven. So basically, the only people that could make it to heaven, according to the original, like old school Catholic Church, were really rich people. Another way that you could get into heaven was to go on a pilgrimage to all of those churches that have all of those relics and go touch all of those relics and be blessed by them. But that's expensive to go out all over Europe to all of these churches. So those are your options. Not really helpful for the lowbrow people, which is why a lot of poor families decided to switch to things like Baptist or Puritan. Puritan is based on the idea of you do good works and you're a good person, you're going to go to heaven. Baptist, you just need to be baptized and be a good person and follow whatever the teachings are. So very different religions popped up. And that's all thanks to humanism, the printing press, and the Renaissance ideas. Now, that's going to be really important for the art as well. And I'll mention that on the next slide. So keep that in mind. The Catholic Church is a bit on it back then. It's going to influence the art. Another thing that pops up in this time is realism in art. That's because, once again, we're having a rebirth of Roman and Greek ideas, including their art. We're now going to start copying their art. And of course, one of the things we copy in realism is foreshortening. Foreshortening is the idea of using diagonals in order to make a form look like it is receding on a two-dimensional plane, making it look three-dimensional. And then another popular thing that pops up primarily in the Puritan areas of Europe is still life painting. Still life painting is a picture or painting of an inanimate object. That is because in Puritanism, you're not supposed to paint religious figures, but they also wanted some sort of a creative way to show off how rich they were and how much money they made, and still life's the way to go. We'll talk more about that on Monday. So the Renaissance does follow the Reformation. The Reformation is that period in time in which all of those new religions pop up. Humanists help lead the Renaissance with their critical thinking. Things that pop up are a lot of scientific and philosophical studies. All of those end up translating over into the arts because artists are very interested in things like that, even today. And of course, the Renaissance is all about a rediscovery of Roman and Greek styles. Since we're looking at the art, we're going to be looking at Roman and Greek styles in art, not philosophies. There are two Renaissance happening simultaneously in Europe. There is the Italian Renaissance and there is the Northern European Renaissance. They are divided into two because in Italy, the Catholic Church still reigns supreme, while as in Northern Europe, it is those new religions that have more traction. Because of that, there is going to be a difference in subject matter being produced in Italy versus Northern Europe. In Italy, you're going to see a lot of religious images. In Northern Europe, you're going to see a lot of still lifes. But regardless, in both Italy and the Northern European Renaissance, you're going to see realism. Last slide was writing, I promise. The last one. So we are starting off in the Italian Renaissance, based around Italy. So in the area where the Catholic Church is still dominating. Because of that, most of the images produced are going to be religious in some way, shape, or form. The three most famous artists to come out of the Renaissance are, of course, Da Vinci, Raphael, and Michelangelo. They come out of something called the High Renaissance. In Italy, the Renaissance is divided into two periods. There's an early and a high. Early Renaissance obviously is the start, the beginning. High Renaissance is where it peaks. And then the Baroque period follows. Da Vinci, Raphael, and Michelangelo are part of that High Renaissance. The last Ninja Turtle is part of the early Renaissance. I don't know why the creator of the Ninja Turtles included Donatello, since he was not technically from that same time period, but hey, he got included. Donatello is a sculptor, by the way. He's not even a painter. Donatello does, however, influence Michelangelo. He kind of helps to teach him. So, I mean, I guess it makes sense. In Italy, since the church still reigned supreme, wealthy families would compete with each other over domination of the government in their relative or particular city-state they were living in, as well as trying to gain favor with the church. If you remember, I said that the wealthy people could pay their way into heaven back then, technically, figuratively speaking. Oftentimes, instead of just handing over a bag of money to the church, they did that too. But other times they would have artworks commissioned for the church and donate those works to the church. So our two main patrons of the art in Italy are wealthy families, and sometimes the Pope would also commission artworks to the church. But almost all images produced in the Italian Renaissance are going to have to do with religion. There are some that were commissioned to be hung in homes of wealthy merchants. Those probably won't be religious, but a good chunk of the art is religious. And by the way, at this point in history, Italy is comprised of city-states. They are not working together. They fight with each other over domination. They don't get along. Early Renaissance. This is Giotto's Scrivini Chapel. This is an example of a chapel in which all of the frescoes were donated. Like the entire chapel was made and donated to the church by the Scrivini family of merchants. They commissioned the artist Giotto to paint all of the frescoes in the chapel. These are fresco stuccos, by the way. And of course, you can see they cover the ceilings and all of the walls. All of these have to do with the New Testament. Here are two of them close up. This is once again early Renaissance. Very, very early, towards the beginning of it, around 1300. High Renaissance comes much later in time. Early Renaissance, you still see a lot of flatness. They don't understand how to show really like depth in the paintings. The only thing they know to do in this time, towards the very beginning of the Renaissance, is to stack figures to try and make it look like they're receding in space. So here Giotto has positioned figures on top of other figures, but he has not shrunk the figures in the background at all. Also, the drapery is still quite stiff. It's not as stiff as it was during Justinian's time, but it is still pretty stiff looking. We see once again a continuation of the use of symbolism in the artworks. So to understand the stories, you have to understand a little bit of the Bible and recognize your symbols. So obviously this is Christ. The lady in the blue cloak over here is Mary. The one at his feet, if you know your Bible story, the one woman that ever goes to Christ's feet is Mary Magdalene. And then a bunch of kings over here and leaders of state, saints over here. This is Christ's burial before he's risen from the tomb. Christ obviously on the ground, surrounded by saints and his mother and angels up in the sky. Once again, very flat. There's no real background or depth to this painting to create the illusion of a recession into space. That will change with people like Masaccio. Masaccio comes towards the end of the early Renaissance period, towards the beginning of the High Renaissance. This is Masaccio's The Holy Trinity. This was commissioned by donors, the husband and wife duo down at the bottom here. That's them. And of course, it does show the Holy Trinity. Here's Mary, one of the saints, Christ on the cross. God and the Holy Spirit is represented by a dove right here. We can tell this obviously comes a lot later than Giotto's, besides just the date being 1305 and 1425. But we also see a lot of depth and dimensionality and a lot more realism in this painting. Masaccio even uses linear perspective. The horizon line is that ledge right here, and your focal point is the center of that ledge. All lines in this work recede to that section. And the bottom of this fresco is probably the most interesting. It shows a skeleton on top of a tomb. This is called a memento mori. Memento moris are extremely popular during the Renaissance period in both Italy and Northern Europe. In fact, the Northern Europeans, I think, specialize in memento moris, in my opinion. They're very clever at doing them. But any guesses as to what a memento mori might be? Anyone that can translate memento and mori?
A moment of mourning.
Kind of close. So memento is remembrance. And mori translates from Italian to death. So this is a remembrance of death, specifically a remembrance that you're going to die. This was posted in a church in early Catholic religion. So they wanted to remind you that you were going to die in hopes that you would donate things to try and repent before you actually die. On the casket, there is an inscription that says, "What you are, I once was. What I am, you will be." Obviously saying, I'm a skeleton, you're going to be one soon too. Just reminding you that you're going to die. Very interesting painting there. The top looks relatively simple, and then the bottom is like, what? Like I said, the Northern European Renaissance also did that, but they did it a little less obviously. They would put in things like rotting fruits or dying flowers to remind you that you were going to die. That takes us to Donatello. Donatello is one of the main sculptors from the early Renaissance, and this is our first David statue. We're going to look at 3 David statues, one from the early Renaissance, one from the High Renaissance, and one from the Baroque period, also known as the Late Renaissance period. Each David is very different from the other one. We're going to be discussing and comparing them as we go along. This David, obviously bronze, echoing early Greek bronze statues. Most of them would have originally been bronze. I'm going to give you a few seconds to think of an adjective or two that you would use to describe this David. Think of maybe his age, his posture. Just a few more seconds, just wait. Susan, what's one adjective you thought of? Just Angel, what's one you thought of? So Angel mentioned the thing that usually nobody ever remembers to mention until I mention it. This is after the battle. So if you're familiar with the story of David and Goliath, David slays the giant Goliath. At the very end, after he's killed the giant, he cuts off his head. So this is the point in which David is cut off Goliath's head. In fact, he's standing on top of it, down below. What's something else that you guys noticed? The posture. What about the posture? He's not flaunting.
No.
No. Let's just see. So that's a pretty normal posture for me. I usually have one hip cocked out. What is a normal male posture? Would men usually have their like one hip cocked out? So this posture is obviously feminine in nature. And that has to do with the age. What do you think the age of this David might be? Just a rough estimate.
17.
A little younger.
Uh,
This is pre-puberty. This David has not gone through puberty yet. He is still very young. He doesn't have much muscle tone going on, and he's still a little bit feminine because he hasn't gone through puberty yet. Yeah. During the High Renaissance, no one would show any figure like this. During the High Renaissance, they're very much invested with that idealized form that the Greeks thought of. So they would show people in their 20s, in their most peak body form, not young like this. What else did you notice about this David? Is he clothed? No, he is naked except for his hat and his boots. Yeah, yep. Makes sense. Yep. Makes complete sense. This David would have been attached to one of the churches in Florence. David was the namesake, well, not really namesake, that was like their hero in Florence. Florence was a very small city-state surrounded by very large, wealthy city-states. So David pops up as symbolism for Florence all over, and it's one of the reasons why we have so many David statues. All of the Davids that we're going to be looking at are from Florence because that was like their patron saint. Huh? Goliath. He's standing on Goliath's head. Yep. That takes us into Neoplatonism. Neoplatonism pops up in the early Renaissance as well as part of that individual thinking. Neoplatonism is the idea that your entire life does not have to revolve around religion. These people wanted to not only bring back Greek and Roman art style, but also Greek and Roman mythology. Not like they believed in the gods and goddesses, but they wanted to enjoy the stories. So we see several artists from that time period illustrating mythological stories, which is something that we hadn't seen since before 313 AD. So it's been a very long time since we've seen pagan mythological stories pop up in art. These guys are not afraid of showing nude gods and goddesses. Of course, these images would not have been donated to a church. I don't know many churches that would want to have a naked Zeus on their walls. These would be done for homes. So these are wealthy merchants purchasing artworks to decorate their houses. One example of Neoplatonist artwork is Sandro Botticelli's The Birth of Venus, which is a tempera painting on canvas. This illustrates the mythological story of Venus's birth. She supposedly is born of sea foam. So this is her coasting in from the sea on a shell. Nimbus and his girlfriend, whose name I forget, is blowing her into the shore, and one of the floral goddesses, whose name I also have forgotten, is waiting there to clothe her on shore. Similarly to the Venus de Medici statue from ancient Greece that we looked at, this Venus is also trying to modestly cover herself, but she is obviously still nude, especially in comparison to everyone else being clothed in some format or fashion. So there's a bit of a coyness there with her. That takes us into the High Renaissance. During the High Renaissance, the main three artists that are really well known, there are other artists working, are of course Da Vinci, Michelangelo, and Raphael. We've looked at Da Vinci's sketches before. He was not only an artist, but also a scientist and philosopher. He carried notebooks with him all the time. He was constantly writing down ideas and thoughts in them. This is his study of the fetus in the womb. He did not cut open a pregnant woman for this. This was a theory of what he thought the womb might look like while someone was pregnant. Funny enough, it's quite accurate. Yeah. So he wasn't too far off. If you've ever looked at his studies of an airplane though, those are also very similar looking to what the first airplanes look like. So kind of a genius for his time, 1500. And of course, he's most well known for this one, the Mona Lisa, an oil painting on wood. It's about this big, not too big. If you go see it in the Louvre, you're gonna have to wait for several hours in line to go see it. So yeah, just buy a postcard. Not worth it. But with this one, we do see for the first time in a long time the use of atmospheric perspective in the background. Really gorgeously done atmospheric perspective with the loose, light, feathery brush strokes. Her facial structure and skin is also very soft and supple looking. This is most likely a painting of a merchant's daughter. Of course, you see her hair with the veil slightly draped over it, and she is wearing time period clothing for the Renaissance. Yeah, it's just her, a self-portrait. Well, not a self-portrait, but a portrait with a landscape in the background. Pretty common for wealthy merchants to commission things like that. This time, Raphael does a large amount of wealthy merchant portraits with landscapes in the background too. Also well known for his Last Supper. If you're wondering what this is right here, that is a doorway entrance. Originally, this was not here. This was added later just because the monastery redid their cafeteria. This is inside of a monastery's cafeteria. There are a lot of Last Supper paintings. Almost all of them are inside monasteries' cafeterias because, I mean, it's a supper. You eat supper in a cafeteria. Makes sense. This obviously also uses linear perspective. Your horizon line is along the eyesight line of all of the apostles, and your focal point is Christ himself. The groupings here are almost all threes. So we have 3 figures, 3 figures, 3 figures. That has to do with compositional choices that were popular during the period. A lot of people felt like groupings of 3 were aesthetically pleasing, same with S-shaped curves and triangles. So Christ himself makes a sturdy triangle. Triangles look very sturdy to the eye. Christ is a sturdy figure. All of the rest of these are in S-shaped curves, which are supposed to help guide our eye to him. So interesting compositional choices. And there are our focal points there in our line. Takes us to our second David and the last thing we're going to talk about today. Michelangelo's David, the most famous of all 3 Davids that we're going to be looking at for this section.
I knew the name of the statue, but I never connected it to the myth, the story.
Yeah. So this David is done in the style of a Roman copy of a Greek bronze. The last Donatello statue was just a Greek bronze style choice. We can tell it's supposed to be done in like a Roman copy aesthetic because of the stump that's attached to the background. That's what the Roman copies all did when they redid the Greek bronzes in marble. I'm going to give you guys another few seconds to take this one in and come up with some adjectives to describe it. maybe think of it in comparison to the last one. This one's huge, by the way. The last one is not. The last one by Donatello is smaller than a real person. This one is a lot bigger. He's 13 feet tall. Melanie, what's one adjective you thought of when you were looking at this? Or one description you could think of?
I think he looks more masculine.
Yeah, he is a lot more masculine. What's another one? Someone in class.
Facial expression.
What about his facial expression?
It is more like serene.
He looks very serene. That is wonderful to point out. That is because Michelangelo is copying those Greek serene looking statues from the high classical period that we talked about yesterday. People are going to do statues like this during the high Renaissance period where they're just serene facial expressions. During the Baroque period, they're going to look more at the Hellenistic art with the over-exaggerated facial expressions. So I'm glad you pointed that out. What's one other word you could think of or something you noticed?
He was confident. Looks like,
He does look very confident, yes.
yeah, his time period is very so it's dating back to like Roman time period. I mean,
Yeah,
it would be connected in
kind of.
a way.
I kind of get what you're trying to say.
He still has that like hip posture though.
There's,
He has contrapposto. He doesn't have the over-exaggerated feminine hips that Donatello's David have. This one uses contrapposto, which is something that was invented in high classical Greek art. So once again, Michelangelo is looking at things like Polyclitus, the spear bearer, to come up with these postures. The spear bearer has almost the exact same posture.
his toes and knees and fingers are really fine.
Very, very detailed, defined characteristics. His hands look huge to me. They look too big, honestly. Now, our last David, it was after slaying the giant. What about this one? Before or during? 'Cause it's not after. We already had our after.
Be before,
It is before.
yeah.
So he is looking off into the distance at the giant, and he is carrying a slingshot, and in this hand you can't really see because we aren't looking at his butt, pebbles. So it is before, which means the last David must be the other answer. So yes, very different. There is a little hole right here. That's because for a long time they had a fig leaf constructed to like slide into there to cover his genitalia because people didn't think it was appropriate. I think it was Bernini, who is the one that made our last David, that added the fig leaf or made the fig leaf to add on. This was meant for the Palazzo in Florence. The Palazzo is like a really large town center, like a courtyard area. But it was moved indoors eventually because it was getting destroyed with bird poop and rain. So it is now inside of a museum. It's the museum walls that you see in the background. Originally, it would have been outside, like a colossal statue. Once again, for Florence, the city that used David as their trademark. There are several plaster copies of David around the world. They're not marble copies, just plaster ones. So they went to the original David statue and made a mold and then filled the mold with plaster, or they got a large block of plaster and carved it, depending on which one you're looking at. one copy does exist at the Victoria and Albert Museum in London. It is the exact same dimensions and size as this one if you ever get a chance to go. Or you can just go to Florence, which I would recommend. Although the museums in London are free and the ones in Florence are not. So it depends on how much money you're willing to spend. And like I said, that's the last one we're going to look at tomorrow, or not tomorrow, Monday. We're going to pick up with Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel and then move into Raphael, some architecture, and then the Northern Renaissance. This will probably take about a third of the class period on Monday. The last 2/3, you're just going to be doing your project. So like I said, I would spend this weekend flipping through those sections and seeing what you want to choose to present on or work with. And then on Monday, come prepared to do a little bit of research and discuss some ideas. Now, Lindsay, I'm guessing probably that Angel and Brandon are going to want to get your phone number before you leave.
Oh, yeah.
It's a guess.
Yeah.
Okay.
One second. Be safe, everyone. Because it looks like it's going to be icy all weekend.
Yeah. I'm surprised I didn't do it classes today. I know.
Yeah.
I was sitting in my car defrosting it this morning because it was covered in ice, just like refreshing my nail, hoping that it would. And then I remembered that I had an ice scraper and I did not put it.
All right.
You too, Brandon.
Have a good weekend, Mom.
You too, Sam.